Good morning. We are glad that you are here. If you are new, welcome. There is a place for you here.
At Woods Chapel Church, we are one church with 3 different campuses.
In Lee Summit,
in Raytown,
And here in Blue Springs.
We are a group of people doing our best to love God and those around us.
Our vision is to build transforming communities where everyone is included, accepted, and loved.
All of us are on a journey.
This is a place where you can ask difficult questions about faith and life.
We are here to help and support each other.
thanks for joining us.
No matter who you are or where you're from, we want you to know that you are welcome.
Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Abby, and I'm so glad that you all have joined us for worship this morning. We want to hear from you, so if you all would let us know where you're watching from, how your week's been, say hello to one another, and if you're new, type the word new so we know that you're here. But let's begin in prayer. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this day. God, we thank you for all of the blessings and gifts that you give to us. We thank you for your love and mercy, that you meet us where we're at, God. Whether we're walking through a stormy season or a season of sunshine, God, we know that you're with us. God, we just ask that as we go through this time of worship, that you can teach us how to be more like you. Teach us how to see through your eyes, God. We want to be more like you. Help us to love others and to show others grace. God, we love you so much, and it's all in your name. Amen. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Holy is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Holy is my song. You are good, you're good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Holy is my song, 'cause you are good, you're good. Oh, 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 you're never gonna let me down. 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 You're
Good morning. My name is Michael Scott, and I'm the pastor here at Woods Chapel Blue Springs. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I hope everybody had a great Father's Day last week. And we've been talking about chaotic situations and how we can take chaos and turn it and create some kind of community out of it. And so I've been asking you for your stories. What are your stories in our communities right now where you're seeing people come together to make change and to make a difference? And I've asked you to share those stories, and we've been listening to people of color. We've been doing interviews and listening to their stories of pain and chaos they've experienced, and also ways in which we can come back together as a community. And today we're going to be talking about how this task of fighting racism, or I don't like to use the term fighting racism, but maybe we can talk about it in a more positive way, that we are repairing race relations, that we are coming together and repairing centuries, if not millennia, of damage. And so the task seems impossible. And I want you to think of a time in your life where maybe you had something to do, or you had a task to accomplish, or something was asked of you, and it almost seemed like it was impossible to do. For me, I had experienced that just this last week. So on Father's Day, on Sunday, I got to do a wedding. And it was the wedding of a dear friend of mine's daughter, who I call my own daughter, and she calls me Dad. I've known her since she was a baby. I've been friends with her parents, Megan and Derek, since I was 12 years old. And I've watched Haley grow up since she was a baby, and my daughter and her are best friends. And so they asked me, it was such an honor to do the wedding. My daughter was the maid of honor. And so I met with them, and we talked about what the wedding's gonna look like. And last week, we get to the week of, right? And I'm ready. I'm ready to go. And I feel all this pressure. I'm like, this is like doing my own daughter's wedding. And I'm like, I'm not going to do it well. It's not going to be, it's not going to be good, or they're not going to like it. Or, I had all this pressure and stress on me. And it seemed like it was impossible to be able to do it. And so like I do often on Sundays, I say often, on occasion, on Wednesday of that week, I scrapped everything I had and I started over from scratch. And what I would tell you is, in praying that and soul searching through that and spending time with my friends and the couple that we were doing the wedding for, what came last Sunday was probably the best Father's Day I've ever had. It was a beautiful wedding, it was a beautiful party, and it was a beautiful and awesome day. Even though it seemed daunting and it seemed impossible, it wasn't. I think often we let ideas or things in our head become bigger than they need to be. And we take situations that seem difficult or hard, and in our own brains we make them impossible, even though they are not. They are possible. That's why we use phrases like, with God, all things are possible. And what that really means is, with each other in a community, through prayer, and through submitting our own wills to something that is greater than ours, that even the hardest things in life are possible. And so we are in our 5th week, and we've talked about everything from how Jesus combated racism by lifting up the Samaritans. We've talked about how even in creation life was chaotic, yet from that came this beautiful garden. And that change is difficult, and God asked us to make changes in our life. And we talked about Abraham and Sarah, and they had to change their names, and they had to physically remove part of themselves in this covenant with God. And there's this idea that life is difficult, and that change is always required. Then last week we talked about Abraham's son. Abraham had a wife, Sarah, but he also had another child with this woman named Hagar. And Sarah gets jealous of Hagar and this other son named Ishmael, and she kicks him out. And that is where we find our Muslim brothers and sisters, is from that lineage. And of course we come from Abraham down through Isaac's side. And because of that one event, this horrible issue came about between Christians and Jews and Muslims and the Islamic faith. And to this day we still fight that and combat that. And we talked about how it's the same thing with race. That racism has been around for a long time. And maybe we didn't start it. Maybe we weren't the perpetrators of the original sin that started race relations being pitted against each other, but it is ours to fix because it still exists here, now, and today, much like the conflict we see in the Middle East between Christians and Jews and Muslims. This week, we're going to talk about Abraham's next step in life. So as soon as we read that last week, that story where he kicks out Hagar and Ishmael, this week I want to talk about the very next thing that happens in his life. And if you're reading along with me, I'm reading the Message version, and we're reading in Genesis 22. And so God and Abraham are having this conversation. And he said, "Take your dear son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I'll point out to you." Abraham got up early in the morning and saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young servants with his son Isaac. He had split wood for the burnt offering. He set out for the place God had directed him. On the 3rd day, he looked up and saw the place in the distance. Abraham told his 2 young servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I are going to go over there and worship, and we'll come back to you." So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and gave it to Isaac, his son, to carry. Now, I always like to stop here in this story. In Abraham's mind, he's going to sacrifice Isaac because he thinks this is what God wants of him. And then they would burn the body. It's interesting. This is what's getting ready to happen, at least in Abraham's mind. And Abraham doesn't even carry the wood. Like, he gives it to Isaac to carry up this mountain. "Here's the wood I'm going to burn you with, and you carry it." I just find that interesting. So he carried the flint and the knife while Isaac carried all the wood. The 2 of them went off together. Isaac said to Abraham, his father, "Father?" "Yes, my son." "We have flint and wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering?" Normally they would take a sheep and they would sacrifice a sheep or a goat of some kind or some kind of animal, and that would be their offering. This idea, this act of sacrifice, that they are giving themselves to something that's greater than them. And so Isaac's asking about this. "We have flint, knife, and wood. Where's the animal?" Abraham's son, "God will see to it that there's a sheep for the burnt offering." And they kept on walking together. They arrived at the place to which God had directed him. Abraham built an altar. He laid out the wood, and he tied up Isaac and laid him on the wood. Abraham reached out and took the knife to kill his son. Just then, an angel of God called out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Yes, I'm listening." "Don't lay a hand on that boy. Don't touch him. Now I know how fearlessly you fear God. You didn't hesitate to place your son, your dear son, on the altar for me." Now, I'm going to be 100% transparent. I do not like that story. Now, that story has meaning and purpose, but I don't like the idea that God would tell somebody to sacrifice their son, because I have kids of my own, and I couldn't even fathom or think of even contemplating that a loving God would ask that of me. Of course, this story is very similar to what ends up happening with Jesus, right? God talks about Jesus as his only begotten son, and he gives him as a sacrifice. But often as we read Genesis and the first 5 books of the Bible, these are stories that we are to learn from. It doesn't mean they happen verbatim. It doesn't mean that God necessarily spoke to Abraham directly, but Abraham felt like this is something that happened, and we can learn from this story. And what I see and what I learned from this story is that often in life, God asks the most difficult things of us. Now, I don't believe he would ever ask you to kill somebody, let alone your son. But God does ask us to do difficult things that seem impossible and unimaginable. And it's our job to take up that call, to rise up, and to do what he is asking us. And I believe right now, if we truly believe that we are to love neighbor as self, that right now we are being asked to take up our call, to do hard things that seem impossible. But yet, if we submit our will to God, if we listen to the voices around us right now, if we listen to the stories, that all things are possible, that we can make a difference, that we can change the relationship between races in our country and in our world. And so like every week, I had the opportunity to sit down with somebody this week. And so I want to invite you to listen to his story. Take a look. Well, good morning, David. I want everybody to know that David is my new boss. His name is David Gilmore. And Jim Simpson, who is our current district superintendent, is retiring, and David is coming in to be the new district superintendent. And I believe David and I had met a few years ago, just in passing. But I had asked David last week to come in and to share with us some of his experience that he has had with racism, and just to talk about it like we have been for the past 4 weeks. And so, David, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I ask that you would share with us anything that you feel is relevant that people might need to hear, whether it was an experience from when you were younger and or when you, as an adult, maybe something something that's recent, or maybe something that happened a long time ago. I want you to have the platform, and so I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you talk.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's an honor for me to be able to participate in this conversation. I think that dialogue is necessary. The story needs to be told, but the story also needs to be heard. And so there are 3 stories that really shaped my life. There are people who believe that racism is restricted to a certain geographic region, and that's not true. I lived in Boston, Massachusetts. I actually started my formal education in Boston, Massachusetts. And I know I look young, but I'm old enough to remember when they were talking about forced busing. And so I was in Boston, and my mother was concerned, literally frightened for me, because she was, they were busing Black children into predominantly white schools to try to force integrate the school. And there were white parents, that were turning the buses over with the kids in the bus.
Oh my.
So my mother decided that I would not go to the school that the school district was saying I had to, because she was afraid for my life. So at the age of 6, I'm facing this, and she decided I would go to a Catholic school. I go to a Catholic school. In order for me to get to the Catholic school, I have to ride a city bus. So there was a young lady that lived in the neighborhood that was going to the same Catholic school, and we were riding the city bus to school every day. And it was on that city bus that I witnessed my first murder at the age of 6. So I was scarred in ways that I didn't even realize until I became older. And it really started with the idea that I was not accepted. That's how I felt. I was not accepted. I felt like there was something wrong with me. The second incident that really impacted me, my father was going to school. He was a second career pastor, and he was going to school at Perkins School of Theology in Dallas, Texas. And so at the time, he had moved us to the outskirts of Dallas. We were living in this relatively nice area, town called Garland. And I was in the 8th grade, and I was reasonably intelligent. Some might say I still am. I was reasonably intelligent, and so I like sports, and so I had named. We had an intramural basketball season, and I had asked if I could form a team, and so the phys ed teachers said, yes, you can. And I named my team Gilmore's Gorillas. That's Guerillas. The phys ed teacher changed it to Gorillas, like the animal. And I said, that's not what I wanted. And he said, no, but that's what you are. This was an adult white male, again, telling me that so again, I'm wondering what's wrong with me. In this same school, there was, I did experience some kids who did not like me because I was one of a handful of Blacks. And so this one young boy walked up to me and spit in my face, called me the N-word. I was angry. So I went after this young boy, and he took off running. And I ended up getting in trouble for chasing this boy through the school. and nothing ever happened to him. Again, it's being reinforced to me that, something's wrong with me. So then the last story that really got me, and I need to say that along the way, there's a talk that I won't say every Black family has, but many Black families that I know have this talk where if you have young children, especially young boys, there are certain things you teach them at a young age as far as how they interact with the police. And so my father had the talk with me. My grandmother had the talk with me. I'm an adult now, and I'm driving. I was in the Navy, and I was driving to work, and I was not speeding. I'm just driving to work, and I noticed that this police car had pulled out behind me, and they were following, and I felt my breathing became very, very shortened. I felt myself beginning to flush. I was scared. This police officer followed me all the way to the front gate of the base and then pulled me over right before I was going to go in and asked me for, driver's license and everything else. And I asked him, what did I do? And the response was, you look like you didn't belong in that neighborhood you just came through. Again, it's reinforced to me as an adult, something's wrong with me. I really struggled for a long time with, I don't want to say it was an inferiority complex, because my family was very, very good about making me feel treasured and making me feel like I was God's gift. But I did struggle for a very long time with how I interacted with people who were outside of my race. Because every time I tried to let the fence down, let the guard down, I would be reminded that I was not their equal. I would be reminded that I was not precious in their sight and treasured like my family made me feel. And it was a struggle for me. I mean, it really was a big struggle. Big struggle.
So what I hear you saying is it was reinforced to you that white people or police were a danger to you. I mean, they would hurt you, whether that's emotional and or physical.
Right.
And then I believe some of this conflict right now is I was raised in a racist household. I've talked about this a few times. I was raised in a household that did not have healthy language around race, and so I was taught that people of color, that I should be scared of people of color. And what I see right now is that we have two completely different cultures who were raised fearing the other one, and really from your side, a rightful fear, because there was actual and imminent danger, as compared to the white fear that wasn't real. It was imposed and taught and reinforced in movies and music. And so how do we begin to change that? So I believe conversation is key, but how do we begin to do that where we are not fearful of each other and can start having dialogue?
It's interesting that you asked that question, Michael. I have always believed that the easiest way in the world for someone to get to know that I'm not a menace is to get to know me. And I believe the same about how I interact with other people. We all have preconceived notions of how people may be, or stereotypes that have been, reinforced through the years in our homes or in our circles that we engage. But the reality is that change happens one life at a time. That, for me, it does.
Can you say that again? That was beautiful.
Change happens one life at a time. One life at a time. So you and I are talking right now, and I got goosebumps thinking about this. You and I are talking right now. We don't really know each other that well, but because we have begun this dialogue, when I get to Missouri, one of the first things I'm going to do is look you up and say, "Hey, brother, how you doing?" just simply because we're having this conversation right now. That means a lot. That means a lot to me, to be able to engage with you and every other person so that they understand that, whatever you may have been raised with is not who you're meeting now. So
Right.
change happens one life at a time. We can hear all kinds of stories growing up, but to actually be able to engage, to have that give and take, to be able to laugh together and to cry together, to be able to have disagreements where we become angry with one another, but understand that it's really just, it's an issue and not the person. That
Right.
to me is where the change begins to take place. And we don't do that well. We just do not do that well. And that's across the board. We have a mob mentality where we will not look at individuals individually. We
Right.
want to lump them all in the same category, in the same group. And I think that does a disservice to why we're here.
So relationship. I mean, that's what I heard
Yes.
through relationship. We have cultural differences, and even within the church, we see. And now this is white people's fault, because we alienated what some would call today the church of color, black church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we and that goes way back into our history.
Mm-hmm.
How do we? What is a first step? What's something that we can do to begin engaging in a relationship? I know you said the conversation we're having, but
Mm-hmm.
are there? I get people asking all the time. I don't know the first step to take, and so what can people do?
So I'm getting ready to say something that's just going to really blow some minds when they hear this. I am not one that believes a dollar can remedy an ill. I think that eventually, there needs to be, revenues or funding or whatever. But, for me, especially in the church, one of the most effective ways for me to establish a real relationship with someone who doesn't look like me is to do a small group study. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's, where
Yes.
you have people that are sitting around the table as equals, studying some book or something, and then entering into open and honest dialogue with one another. Where it's already established beforehand, this is a safe space. And so people can go ahead and tear down the walls and begin to allow those vulnerabilities to be exposed. That's where you begin to develop the trusting relationships. That's what I believe. That's what I believe.
Well, I heard you say around a table. I mean, that just makes me think of communion, right? That's what Jesus was trying. That's the point of communion. He kind of turned it into this holy sacrament, which it is. But Jesus was simply trying to get us around a table with a bunch of people to build those relationships.
Yes.
I love that.
That's it. That's it.
I mean, that's real communion, right? To commune
I think it
with
is.
others. Yeah.
I think it is.
Well, I love tables just in general, but I love round tables because I think the table is the only place in our communities and our cultures where when we all come to a table, especially like for a meal, we're all equal, especially a round table. There is nobody, there's no head of the table, because in conference rooms or in other settings, there's a head of a table and the boss man. But in a round table, when you're eating, when everybody comes to it, you're not a race, you're not any orientation you may have, whether you're sex, you're LGBTQ, it doesn't matter. When we're around a table, we're all the same.
Yeah.
And the table is a great equalizer.
I think it is.
That's what Jesus wanted us to do with communion, is to truly build relationships. Man, I love that. That's it seems so simple, but sometimes we're not good at it. And so,
right.
If you had anything else to say, anything that you feel like needs to be said, what would you say?
I'm grateful to you and to the churches, not just in Missouri, not just in the Heartland District, but also, even believe it or not, up here in New York and Connecticut. there are some real conversations taking place now. I say this, and people sometimes look at me like something's wrong with me, but the things that are meant, many of the things that are being spoken by these people that have been labeled activists have been spoken for decades. I mean, decades. The problem was that I think a lot of times it was falling on deaf ears, because it was not directly affecting the hearer. Now I'm sensing an empathy that I did not sense before, where people are actually listening to what's being said. And when I look at the voices that are speaking up, I don't just hear Black voices. I see my white sisters and brothers, and I see my Indian sisters and brothers, and I see my Hispanic Latinx sisters and brothers, and I see my gay and straight sisters and brothers. I see everybody is coming to the table to say enough is enough. Let's come together. I will say this, and I mean this with all that I am. I do believe that when we begin to see ourselves in each other, when I can look at you and see me, that I will give you higher value, greater worth. And that's my hope. My hope is that when I come and visit with your church, or I go and visit with anybody else's church, or if I meet somebody on the street, when they see me, they see themselves. That's my hope. Because when that happens, then I'm going to be seen as somebody. And that's what's most important, to be seen as somebody. So,
you mentioned it earlier. I think that's where the empathy part probably comes into play.
Yes.
And I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. I listen to her podcast every week, and she talks about empathy a lot. Mm-hmm. And of course, her thing is, in order to have empathy for somebody, you have to have a relationship. And she says the base, and which is what you're saying too, right? Relationship, which leads to empathy, to be able to see people. Or I like what you said. Actually, can you say that again about seeing yourself and others? Like you said it.
Yeah, when we encounter others, my prayer is that when we're seeing them, when we're looking at them, we can see ourselves in them.
I love that.
Because when we see ourselves in them, then we will give them greater value. They will have greater worth because we're looking at ourselves in them. It's easy to say, look for God in everybody that we need. It's real easy to say that, but that to me is, and I'm just going to be, that's pie in the sky stuff sometimes, because very few of us have actually encountered God, or if we did encounter God, we didn't know we were meeting God,
Right.
But I'm going to meet you.
Right. That's real and concrete. That's not abstract.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those where it's tangible. I can actually say, "Hey, brother, how you doing?" And we're going to be able to greet one another. Well, because I can see you, and I think there's some biblical precedent for that. Because I can see you, and because I can appreciate you, and because I can see you as a person of worth, because I see me. I don't know. Maybe that's that. I'm showing my love of God by loving you.
Others, yes.
Just, that's silly.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I love that. I'm gonna quote you next week on that. I'm gonna hashtag that. I'm gonna put it out there everywhere. That's beautiful. It starts by seeing ourselves in others.
Yeah.
So when you look at somebody else to see that, I mean, that's love neighbor as self too, right? That's all the same thing. It's the same principle.
Yes, it is.
I love it. David, thank you so much. Every week I feel like personally, I've gotten to hear the story of people who have been marginalized and to help understand us a little bit more. And I'll be the first to admit, sometimes it makes us nervous to ask about race and ask these questions. And I think that vulnerability between two people is what sparks relationship, which sparks empathy, which sparks all the things. So thank you, one, for being vulnerable and telling us very vulnerable stories about yourself. Thank you for your willingness to speak to us and help us to understand, I guess what's going on and then what we can do, because you give us some good tools. So thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you in person and maybe in the next month or so, maybe.
Yes.
We'll get through the summer, maybe.
It.
So maybe August or something like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. God bless you, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we pray?
Yes.
God, thank you so much for David. I want to thank you for him, his family, and God, as they literally move closer to us, and he moves back to Missouri. I just want to pray a special blessing over him and his family. God, may they be safe. May your presence be with them. And God, as we move into this new era of life, into this new territory, God, both physically and of course, both in the abstract, God, as we move into this new territory of helping to heal relations between race, God, I just want to pray that you would bless all of us, that we would continue to heal, that we would continue to listen to the stories of people who have been marginalized and hurt, and that relationships would continue to be built. God, I pray that you would bless us in these endeavors and that your spirit might guide us and be with us always. And I pray these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, David.
And the crashing and the pressing, you are making new wine, and the soil I now surrender. You are breaking new ground, so I yield to you and to your careful hand, and I trust you. I don't need to understand. Make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. And the crashing and the pressing, you are making new wine, and the soil I now surrender. You are breaking new ground. You are breaking new ground. So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power, there is new freedom. The kingdom is here. I lay down my old flames to carry a new fire today. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power, there is new freedom. The kingdom is here. I lay down my old flames to carry a new fire today. So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever
I want to thank you for joining us today, and I want to thank David Gilmore for his story that he shared with us. As you think about these things, as you think about the task that is ahead of us, I simply ask that you would pray about it, that you would do what David asks of us, which is to listen, which is to see yourself in others and those around you. And that task seems almost impossible, but I believe it is obtainable. So as you go about your week, I challenge you to see others, see yourself in them as God sees them. Have a great week. Go in peace.